thank you all for coming. It really means a lot to each one of us that you're here to share with us today. It's very significant to me that we're holding this service at New Salem. My grandparents, Philip and Lucille Conley, were members here from the early 1950s until their deaths. And my dad and his siblings were all raised here. And in recent years, my cousins and our kids have continued to come here each time we gather in Statesville. And in addition, our son Davis is buried in the cemetery next to Dad, so this is a very special place for us. Over the next few minutes, I just want to touch on some ways Mom impacted me and maybe many of you all as well. Toughness. Mom was tough. Maybe she was a little bit of a tomboy. She grew up with three brothers, Young, Harry, and Clell. When she married my dad, she joined his family, where he also had three brothers, Bill, Bob, and Joe. Now, granted, Dad did have one sister, Aunt Barbara, but she was a kindred spirit, being the only daughter just like my mom was. And when Mom had kids of her own, of course she had boys. So when Neil and I each married, Mom wept. Not because she was losing her boys, but rather she was gaining daughters-in-law to help balance things out. I might have made that last part up, I'm not sure. Music. Mom's life was a life of music. Her own mother played the organ and piano, and in fact, that's how Mike Davis' grandparents met. Mom was a music major in college, and after graduating, became a piano teacher in Elizabeth City. In addition, she played for a local church. And after we moved back to Statesville, she joined the choir at First Baptist, played in their handbell choir, and was a substitute organist there. In later years, she became the primary pianist at Concord Presbyterian. In her last year, after she moved into assisted living at the Gardens, she would play the piano for them from time to time. I've never forgotten, though, when she first moved in, we got her on the piano, brought her a hymnal, and asked her to play a few. These were our requests, so these were not ones that she necessarily had been practicing or anything like that. And she played them like a champ, as if she'd been practicing for days and weeks. The staff and other residents were quite impressed. College and love. Now, before we get to college, I want to tell you how she met Dad. Mom was a city girl, attending city schools most of her life. My dad was from the country, just down the road here. But sometimes the kids from the city intersected with the kids from the country. And one of those places was at JC's Toot and Tell. Mom was with her friends, Marion Walker, Judy Flowers, and cousin Carolyn McInnes. That night, the girls ran into four guys from Cool Spring, including Jimmy Connolly. According to Carolyn, they all paired off and began dating relationships over the summer. But there was only one couple that lasted, and that was Gay and Jim. Now, in terms of college, Mom took a little while to figure out where she wanted to be. She started at WC, or Women's College, which is now known as UNCG, is what most of us know. But it just wasn't for her, so she decided to transfer to Meredith. And she loved Meredith, but except for one thing, it was a long way from Jimmy. So she made her final transfer to Appalachian State Teachers College, where my dad was attending. They married in the summer of '65. It's worth mentioning that I also made a college decision based on love, spurning my beloved UNC Tar Heels to attend Appalachian State, where Tammy was going to go. And I think both of these decisions worked out well for us all. Mom and Dad had many wonderful memories from their time in Boone of skiing and playing bridge, and especially of time spent with lifelong friends, Marion and Linda Carver. Let's talk about smoking. Most of you know Mom smoked for many, many years. And you know how difficult a habit that is to quit, to kick. It was just a part of her life. I thought she would do it till the day she died. But when her second husband, Gene, who was also a lifelong smoker, developed COPD, she stopped smoking in the house. That was a big step for her. And later, after Gene had passed away and when she was diagnosed with COPD herself, Mom quit, May the 31st, 2014. She didn't talk with any of us about it beforehand. She just decided to do it. Later, while we were cleaning out her house, we found this piece of paper where she had written down the date. And so as much as smoking had been a part of her life, it became something almost forgotten, and for that I'm very proud of her. Male role models. Mom was aware of the challenges Neil and I faced without her father. She made several intentional choices to address these. We were involved at First Baptist in their youth group, Sunday school, and their youth choir. She put us in scouts despite my objections, knowing how important this was for our development. Most significantly, she made the choice to move back to Statesville following my father's passing so that we could be raised near both sets of grandparents and remain connected to our extended family. Lots of kids in our situation lose not only the parent, but also the family of the deceased parent, and she wasn't going to allow that to happen. And so we grew up knowing our aunts, uncles, and cousins very well. Her dementia. So in caring for a dementia patient, it's important to keep a sense of humor about it all, as there can be a lot of struggles. Dementia affects folks in many different ways. Mom was of the agitated and suspicious variety. In later years, she was quite convinced that there were people breaking into her home and stealing things. So she did what most any reasonable person would do. She started hiding her purses, keys, and combs. Of course, she couldn't remember where she'd hidden them. And then worse yet, she forgot that she hid them in the first place. So that further convinced her that people were stealing things and perpetuated the cycle. While dementia led to confusion and misunderstanding, it also brought out some great stories. And Lord help us with this one. I'm going to try to get through it. Approximately a year or two back, we were replacing her phones. See, Mom had been calling the police multiple times a day because she thought people were stealing from her, and she thought her neighbors were blaring music in her bedroom window all day long. So we were trying to stop that so that the police weren't at her house all day long. So I found a phone that's especially designed for dementia patients that could restrict these calls. Neil had gone over and had taken her old phones outside to the garbage container. And that's where things got interesting. Mom called me to fuss about it. She said that Neil had started to jump up and down on the phones in order to destroy them. Apparently, just putting them in the trash can wasn't enough for Neil. Unfortunately, in the chaos, his pants and his underwear fell down to his ankles in the middle of the driveway. And sadly, according to Mom, she noticed that his rear end was a whole lot bigger than it was the last time she had seen it. I did not know what to say to that. I just told her that I was just not in a good place to come over and help verify. Loyalty. Mom faced significant challenges in both of her marriages. In her first, she and Dad battled his cancer through 3 rounds before he finally succumbed to the disease after 8 years. Beyond that, Dad liked to teach, golf, and play bridge, which meant he was away from home quite often. Not that he was a bad father and husband, quite contrary, but he was probably still away a lot more than a young wife would have liked. In her second marriage, she and Jean paired her 2 sons, ages 13 and 11, with his 3 daughters, ages 19, 15, and 13, in a Brady Bunch-like stepfamily. It's difficult enough to raise teenagers, but to do it in the context of a stepfamily is quite challenging. Pair that with the stresses of owning a small business, G&G Hobbies, and it might have been easier for her and Jean to simply consider other options. But they didn't. As Ruth Bell Graham famously declared when asked if she ever considered divorcing Billy, "I've never considered divorce. Murder, yes, but not divorce." Mom was loyal and took her wedding vows seriously. I feel tremendous gratitude for the last period of her life and what that has meant to me. Unfortunately, Mom and I were not close before she developed dementia, and that disease did not help. It's certainly unfair to her in that my dad was around for the fun early years and didn't have to parent me through the teenage years. She was left to do that and sometimes had to be the bad guy. There were things I'm sure she would do differently if she had a do-over, and as I've aged, I've seen more and more of my own responsibility. It was also certainly painful to hear things said to me through the dementia, but during these recent years, I'm grateful for how God has brought me and Neil together, along with our wives, and gifted us with unity in handling Mom's care and affairs. I'm also grateful for the support we received from Uncle Harry and so many of you during this time. In the last few days, Mom's been in the hospital following her fall and then in hospice. To see her need and be able to help really put things in a different perspective. That was the gift of God to me, to be there for her. Mom suffered much in her last few years, and even more so in her final days. The dementia left her not understanding or remembering things, at times alone in her own world. And the broken hip and subsequent treatment gave her not only physical pain, but further confusion. We as her family and friends also suffered as we walked with her during these trials. In the book of Job, chapter 33, the author discusses 2 of the ways God speaks to us, in dreams and in pain. The English scholar and Christian apologist C.S. Lewis once expounded upon God speaking to us through our pain, quoting, "We can ignore even pleasure, but pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Various folks have asked how they can help, how they can pray for us during this time. And I would simply ask you to join us as we lean into the pain of not only what once was, but even the pain of what we hoped for that wasn't. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Psalm 30, verse 5. Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. We can't get to the joy without first going through the pain. I've often kidded Tammy that should I go first, I don't want her to have a celebration of life service for me. I want it to be a 2 to 3 hour, gloomy, morose, dour affair with sackcloth and ashes like they did in the old days. I do say this in jest, but with some sincerity. To feel pain is to acknowledge that something was loved and had great meaning in our lives. God can redeem and overcome the pain, so let's not be afraid to walk through it together and listen for his voice. He just might have something to say if only we will listen.